My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 39 years old, and up until a year ago, I thought I had everything figured out: a stable job, a quiet house in the suburbs, a marriage that looked solid from the outside. The kind of life you don't question because it feels safe, predictable. But safety is a fragile illusion, and trust, once it cracks, cuts deeper than any knife. I remember the night it started to crumble. It was late October, cold enough that the windows fogged when I exhaled. I'd been on the road all day, a sales trip up north that should have lasted until morning, but something in my gut told me to come home early. I wish I could say it was instinct, but it wasn't. It was suspicion, the kind that grows slowly, feeding on every unanswered text, every cold glance across the dinner table. When I pulled into the driveway, our house looked normal, porch light glowing, curtains drawn. Nothing out of place, except for one thing: her car wasn't there. Rachel always parked in the same spot, always. I sat in the car for a long minute, the engine still running, staring at that empty space like it could explain itself. Then I killed the lights and got out. Inside, the air smelled different. Not wrong exactly, just not us. There was a faint trace of cologne that didn't belong to me. Something musky, expensive. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at two wine glasses on the counter. One was half full. Lipstick smudged the rim. Her lipstick. She wasn't home, but someone had been. I went upstairs, slow, quiet. Her phone wasn't on the charger, but her laptop was open on the desk. Out of habit or desperation, I moved the mouse. A message blinked on the screen. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. And below it, her reply: me neither. I wish he'd just leave for good. I stood there motionless, feeling the blood drain from my face. My hand shook, but I couldn't stop reading. There were more messages, weeks of them, plans, secrets, lies. The man's name was Caleb Warren. I knew the name. He was her coworker at the firm. The one she swore was just a friend. Funny how that phrase starts sounding like a confession when you hear it too many times. I didn't confront her right away. I just froze. I scrolled through photos, messages, call logs, all the little breadcrumbs that painted the truth I'd been too blind to see. My wife was in love with another man. By the time I heard her car pull up outside, I'd gone completely numb. She came in humming, actually humming, like the world hadn't shifted. When she saw me sitting there in the dark, she stopped dead. Ethan, you scared me. I didn't answer. I just turned the laptop toward her. For a second, she didn't move. Then her face changed, not guilt, not shame, just calculation. Like she was doing the math on how much I know, how much she could still hide. You were reading my messages, she asked, voice cold. That tone, like I was the one who'd crossed the line, snapped something inside me. You think that's the problem here, I said quietly. You think privacy's the issue. She crossed her arms. You had no right. You had no right to destroy our marriage. Silence. Then, almost casually, she said, maybe it was already broken. That was it. No tears, no apology. Just that. I left. I didn't yell, didn't hit anything, didn't even slam the door. I just walked out into the cold and drove. I spent the night in my car at the edge of town, parked by the lake we used to visit years ago. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, calm, detached, like none of it mattered. But something else stuck with me too. The man's name, Caleb Warren. I needed to see him. Not to fight him, not yet, just to look him in the eye. The next morning, I followed her. She left the house early, same as always. She thought I was gone, staying at a hotel. I waited until she hit the main road, then tailed her from a few cars back. She didn't notice. Her office building was a glass tower downtown, all mirrors and steel. She parked in the underground lot. I waited. 10 minutes later he arrived. I recognized him instantly. Tall, clean-cut, maybe late 30s. The kind of man who looked like he was born confident. He smiled when he saw her. She smiled back. Then he touched her. Just a small gesture, a hand on her waist, but it was enough. enough to make everything inside me turn cold. I took a photo, then another. Then I started digging. Over the next few weeks, I became someone else. I wasn't Ethan Cole, the salesman, the husband. I was a ghost. I hacked into her email. I followed her car. I learned where Caleb lived, a downtown condo, Unit 1507, paid for in cash 2 years ago. I learned he wasn't just a coworker, he was her supervisor, and I learned something else. He was married too. Her name was Lydia Warren. A nurse, 2 kids. That changed everything. Because suddenly, I wasn't just a betrayed husband. I was part of something bigger, a pattern of lies, a double life tangled in secrets neither of them thought would ever come to light. I thought about confronting Caleb first. I even parked outside his building one night, engine off, watching the windows until dawn. But I didn't. Not yet. Something in me wanted to understand before I acted. And that's when I found it, a detail so strange it didn't make sense at first. Caleb's condo wasn't listed in his name. The deed was registered to a company I'd never heard of, Warren Technologies LLC, but there was no business under that name in any database. It was a shell company, a front, and when I dug deeper, I found something that made my stomach drop. Rachel had made transfers to that company, small ones at first, then larger, thousands of dollars, sent from our joint account over the past year. That's when I realized this wasn't just an affair. It was a setup, and I was the mark. That night, I went back home. Rachel was asleep, or pretending to be. I sat beside her on the bed, watching her breathe. The woman I'd shared 10 years of my life with, the woman I once trusted more than anyone, was lying next to me like a stranger. I whispered, "Why, Rachel?" She didn't answer, but in that moment, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to lose control. No. I was going to take everything back, piece by piece, until she felt what I felt. And when it was over, when they were both broken and begging for mercy, I'd smile, just like she did. You never really know how far you'll go until someone burns your life to the ground. In the weeks after I found out about Rachel and Caleb, I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I started watching. Not just her, everything. Every movement, every transaction, every subtle pattern in the life I thought I understood. When you've been lied to long enough, your brain rewires itself. You start noticing things you'd normally ignore, a glance that lingers too long, a receipt left on the counter, a locked drawer that wasn't locked before. And what I began to see terrified me. Because Rachel wasn't just having an affair. She was building something. I found the first real clue on a Wednesday night. She was in the shower and I was pretending to watch TV when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. Old habits of trust die hard, even after betrayal. But my instincts took over. The message came from an unknown number. Transfer confirmed. Keep your head down for now. That was it. No name, no context. But when I checked her banking app later that night, another withdrawal was gone. $12,000. Transferred to that same shell company, Warren Technologies LLC. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more. So I started documenting everything. I bought a small hidden camera, installed it in my office, and another one in the car. I cloned her phone using software I found on a hacker forum. I even made a burner email account to track her logins. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about truth. And the more truth I uncovered, the darker it got. It turned out Caleb wasn't who he said he was. His name was Caleb Warren. But there was no public record of his employment at the firm before 2 years ago, no LinkedIn, no tax records, nothing before 2022. It was as if he'd appeared out of nowhere. I ran his plates. The condo he lived in wasn't just paid in cash. It was owned by a holding company in Delaware. And guess who filed the paperwork for that company? Rachel Cole, my wife. I remember the exact moment I realized she'd been using me. It was late, 2:30 a.m., and I was sitting in front of my computer, surrounded by screenshots, emails, account records, And then I found it, a private folder on our shared cloud drive. It was hidden behind several decoy files, but once I cracked it, I saw contracts, NDA letters, wire transfers, and names. Dozens of names. People I didn't know. Rachel had been funneling money through shell companies tied to Warren Technologies. But this wasn't about cheating, it was about fraud. The company she worked for had a government contract, something to do with cybersecurity infrastructure. If she was moving money under the radar, this could be criminal. I stared at her name on those documents. The signature I'd seen 1,000 times before, and for the first time, I felt something colder than anger. Fear. The next morning, I called an old friend, Detective Daniel Briggs. We went to college together before life took us in different directions. He owed me a favor, and when I told him what I'd found, he went quiet. "You sure you want to dig into this, Ethan?" he asked. "I already did." "Then brace yourself. I'll see what I can pull up." 2 days later, he called back. "You weren't wrong," he said, "but it's worse than you think." Briggs told me Caleb had been under quiet surveillance before. The Bureau had flagged his name in connection with an offshore laundering scheme 3 years ago. Nothing stuck, but they'd kept an eye on him. And now Rachel's name was showing up in the same circles: low-level shell transfers, dummy accounts, wire routing through Cayman banks. It wasn't just adultery, it was organized crime. I remember gripping the phone, pacing my living room in disbelief. "You're saying my wife's part of some money laundering ring?" "I'm saying she's involved. Maybe willingly, maybe not. But this goes beyond an affair." He paused. Then, carefully, "If she's in deep, Ethan, you need to stay out of it. People disappear over this kind of thing." But I couldn't. I was already into deep. That weekend, Rachel told me she had to work late. I smiled and nodded, pretending to believe her. Then, once she left, I followed her. She drove across town to an old industrial park. Half the buildings abandoned, the rest converted into small private offices. She parked beside a dark warehouse with tinted windows. I killed my engine and waited. After 15 minutes, Caleb arrived. They met outside the door, exchanged a few words, then went inside. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone and hit record. They were inside for nearly an hour. When they finally came out, Rachel looked different. Not nervous, not scared, just cold. She handed Caleb a folder. He opened it, flipped through it, nodded. Then he handed her something, a small black USB drive. They didn't kiss, didn't touch, just walked to their cars and drove off in opposite directions. I followed Caleb this time. He didn't go home. He went to the docks. He parked near a storage facility, walked inside carrying the folder, and came out empty-handed 20 minutes later. That was the night I realized something. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about leverage. Rachel wasn't being manipulated. She was a partner. And whatever they were doing, it involved data, money, and government contracts worth millions. I should have gone to Briggs then. Should have handed it all over. But I didn't, because the part of me that had once loved her, the part that still wanted her to hurt like I did, needed something more than justice. I needed proof she couldn't escape, and maybe, if I was honest with myself, I wanted her to see me again, not as the husband she lied to, but as the man who could destroy her world the same way she destroyed mine. So I made a plan. I copied the data from her secret folder. I started piecing together the network, the companies, the transfers, the accounts. I mapped it all out, every lie, every dollar, every connection. And buried deep in one of those files, I found a single encrypted document. Its title was simple: call_asset_03, my last name. Asset. And the number 3. I sat there staring at it, heart pounding. There was only one question in my mind. If there was an asset_03, what the hell happened to asset_01 and asset_02? You can't come back from what I did next. Once you cross that line between victim and predator, there's no road back to innocence. I'd told myself I just wanted the truth, but that was a lie. What I wanted was control. What I wanted was for Rachel to feel powerless, the way she'd made me feel. And to do that, I had to set a trap. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By gay, I was the same tired husband, polite smile, coffee on the counter, empty conversation about her projects. By night, I became something else entirely. I dug deeper into her files, tracked every digital trace, and followed every breadcrumb until the picture started to make sense. Cole_asset_03 wasn't just a random file name. It was part of an internal code system they used to catalog clients, or, more accurately, assets. And when I decrypted the file, after 3 sleepless nights and a dozen password attempts, what I found made my stomach turn. It wasn't about money laundering anymore. It was about blackmail. Inside the file were personal dossiers, corporate executives, politicians, contractors, all tied to government infrastructure deals. Each dossier had the same pattern: incriminating material, bank account numbers, communication logs, hidden camera footage. They weren't just laundering money. They were buying leverage. And Rachel was one of the architects. There was one more thing in the folder, a video. When I clicked play, the screen filled with footage of an office meeting. Rachel was there. So was Caleb, and another man, older, sharp suit, no expression. The video had no audio, but the tension was visible. Caleb handed Rachel a manila envelope. She opened it, looked inside, and nodded. The older man slid a document across the table, something official looking. Then Rachel signed it. That signature, her signature, beneath a government seal. The file name, authorization_asset_03. That was the moment I realized I was the asset. Cole_asset_03. Me. They'd been using my name, my ID, my financial credentials to move funds through systems I didn't even know existed. Every transaction, every signature, every approval she'd needed from her husband's account, it all connected. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd built her empire on me. The rage that hit me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, cold, like the calm before a storm. That's when I decided she wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose everything. To destroy someone like Rachel, you can't just confront them. You have to make them unravel themselves, step by step. So I started feeding the machine false data, minor discrepancies in the accounts, subtle delays in transfers, dummy transactions that looked real but looped back into her own accounts. Every time she thought she was moving money safely, I redirected small amounts into traceable channels, all tied to her personal information. Briggs helped me behind the scenes, unofficially. He was furious when I told him what I was doing, but he also understood. Ethan, this could blow back on you. I know, you're not hearing me. This is federal-level fraud. If you trip an alert, then they'll find her first. He didn't argue after that. 3 days later, Rachel started panicking. I could tell from the way she paced around the house, the way she jumped every time her phone buzzed. She thought she was hiding it, but I saw everything. Then one night, she broke her routine. She came home late, after midnight, and when she thought I was asleep, she went to her office and made a call. I stayed silent, recording from the hallway. No, I don't know what happened. The routing data's off. Half the transfers are bouncing back. Yes, I checked the source keys. Caleb, this isn't me. Someone's. She stopped mid-sentence, listening. Her tone changed. What do you mean the Bureau's watching? Since when? No, listen. If this gets out, I'm done. We're both done. Do you hear me? Then she hung up and smashed her phone against the desk. That's when I knew my trap was working, but I wasn't finished yet. The next step was psychological. I created an anonymous email address and sent her a message. Subject, Asset 03 compromised. Body, you should have chosen honesty over ambition. No name, no threats. Just that. An hour later, she deleted all her recent files, packed a bag, and drove off. I followed her, keeping my distance, to the same industrial park. This time, Caleb was already waiting, furious. Through the zoom lens of my camera, I watched them argue. She shouted. He grabbed her arm. She shoved him back. He threw something, a USB drive, into the dirt and stormed off. Rachel sank to her knees, sobbing. And for the first time, I almost felt sorry for her. The next day, Briggs called. You stirred up a hornet's nest, he said. The Bureau's making moves. Caleb Warren's under active surveillance again, and your wife's name just popped up in a federal database. Good, I said. Not good. If they trace the false accounts you set up, you'll be in the same net. That's the point, I told him. I want to be in the net. You've lost it. No, I'm setting the stage. See, I knew Rachel would run eventually. She was too smart to stick around once the walls started closing in. But before she did, she'd try one last thing, a cleanup, and I was counting on it, because buried inside her chaos was the one thing she couldn't delete, the encrypted backup I'd planted myself, a mirror image of her entire operation, stored under one of her own aliases, waiting for her to use it. The moment she accessed it, it would ping an alert straight to Briggs, and to me. I'd set the digital equivalent of a tripwire. All I had to do now was wait. It happened 2 nights later. A signal, a login from an unknown location. The alert flashed on my screen. RCOLE_backup01, access detected. I opened the trace feed and watched the connection route through a proxy, bouncing from city to city until it stopped in a small motel 2 hours north of town. She was running. I grabbed my keys. There are moments when your heart and mind split. One screaming, don't do this. The other whispering, you already have. By the time I realized which side I'd chosen, I was already on the highway. When I pulled into the motel lot, her car was there, half hidden behind a dumpster, her suitcase visible in the back seat. Room 12, curtains drawn. I sat there for 5 minutes, watching. Then I walked to her door and knocked twice. No answer. I tried again. Then I heard movement, a soft shuffle inside, then silence. Rachel, I said quietly. It's me. The door opened an inch. Her face appeared in the gap, pale, eyes red from crying. Ethan, she whispered. You shouldn't be here. I could say the same thing, I replied. She hesitated, then opened the door fully. And what I saw behind her, the papers, the burner phones, the half-burned USB drive on the table, told me everything I needed to know. She was already planning to disappear, but not before taking something, or someone, down with her. I didn't plan to kill her. At least, that's what I kept telling myself on the drive up to the motel. But when you've been hollowed out by betrayal, when every heartbeat feels like a countdown, you stop knowing what you're capable of. Rachel stood there in the doorway, trembling, one hand gripping the frame like she needed it to stay upright. The color was gone from her face. The woman who once burned with ambition, who filled every room with control, looked like a ghost of herself. Ethan, she whispered. You don't understand. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. Double quotes. Oh, I understand plenty, I said. You stole from me. You lied to me. You built your empire on my name. And now you're running because you know it's all crashing down. Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no softness in them, just fear. You think this is about you, she said, voice cracking. They're coming for both of us. The room was a mess, open laptop, piles of shredded paper, 2 empty coffee cups, a half-packed suitcase. A revolver sat on the nightstand. Not hers, Caleb's, maybe. I asked. She turned toward the laptop. Caleb made a deal, one that went bad. He used you as a ghost account because he thought the Bureau wouldn't suspect a low-level tech engineer. When I found out, it was too late. They tied my name to it too. That's why I had to what? Sleep with him. Sign my life away. She slammed her hands on the table. To survive, Ethan. You think this was easy for me? My laugh was sharp and humorless. Yeah, must have been real hard living in mansions built with my money. She flinched. You have no idea what they threatened to do. There was a storm outside, thunder rolling low across the hills. Lightning flashed through the curtains, briefly illuminating her face. It wasn't guilt I saw. It was desperation. I walked toward her. So tell me, who's they? She shook her head. You don't want to know. If you're smart, you'll walk out that door and never look back. Try me. She hesitated. Then she said it. Caleb wasn't just a partner. He was working for a private contractor, Black Ops, off-the-book surveillance contracts. They built a data pipeline for the government, and they used people like you as facades. Every transaction, every system signature. You were the perfect cover. He needed your credentials to bury his trail. I felt sick, and you helped him. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, I said. Her eyes darted toward the gun. I saw it before she even moved. I lunged first, grabbing her wrist as her fingers brushed the handle. We struggled, her screaming. My hands clamped around her arm. The gun hit the floor, spinning under the table. She shoved me back with a strength that surprised me. You think you're the only one who's been used, she shouted. He used me too, Ethan. I loved you, but you were already gone. You stopped seeing me years ago. Don't you dare make this my fault. I roared. We froze, both shaking, breathing hard. The storm outside cracked again, rattling the window. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sat down on the bed, covering her face with her hands. You think revenge is going to fix this? You think destroying me makes you whole? It's not about revenge, I said quietly. It's about balance. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Briggs calling. Rachel looked up, eyes widening. Don't answer that. I did. Briggs. His voice was sharp, urgent. Ethan, where the hell are you? I found her. Listen to me, you need to get out. Caleb's dead. My pulse stopped. What? They found his body 2 hours ago. Motel off the interstate. Shot execution style. And it gets worse. Your name's in his phone logs. The Bureau's issuing warrants. I turned toward Rachel. Did you hear that? She looked like she might faint. No, that's not possible. He said. Ethan, Briggs said, I don't know what you did, but someone's framing you. You're being set up to take the fall. The line went dead. I stared at Rachel. You knew this would happen. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Ethan, please. I didn't want this. Caleb said if I helped him move the last batch of transfers, we'd both be free. I swear I didn't know. I stepped closer. You didn't know what? That he'd die. Or that I'd end up with a federal bullet in my back. I can fix this, she said. There's a drive, everything Caleb had, every name, every code. It's the only way to clear you. Where is it? She hesitated. In the car. But once you see what's on it, you'll understand. It's not just us they're coming for. It's everyone. We stepped outside into the rain. Her hands were shaking as she unlocked the trunk. Inside, beneath a layer of clothes, was a small metal case. She opened it. A black USB drive. The same one I'd seen Caleb throw in the dirt days ago, but this time, it was clean, polished, and touched. She handed it to me. That's everything. I took it, and in that second, headlights swept across the parking lot. To black SUVs. No license plates. Rachel froze. Oh my God. They found me inside, I said, grabbing her arm. We ran back into the room as doors slammed and boots hit the gravel. I pulled the curtains closed. She backed away, whispering, They won't let us walk out of here alive. Who are they? I demanded. But before she could answer, a voice shouted from outside, calm, commanding. Rachel Cole. Step away from the door. She gasped. That's not the Bureau. Bullets tore through the window before I could move. I threw her to the floor as glass shattered around us. The laptop exploded in sparks. My ears rang. When I looked up, she was bleeding from her arm, grazed, but alive. I grabbed the gun from the floor and fired back toward the door. More shots, shouts, footsteps retreating. Then silence. We crawled to the far wall, panting, drenched in rain and sweat. Rachel stared at me. terrified, vulnerable. "Ethan, what did you do?" "I think," I said, loading another round, "I just made things even." She shook her head, sobbing. "You don't understand. Once they mark you, there's no way out. You should have let me handle it." I cut her off. "You already handled it. That's why we're here." She looked at the drive still clutched in my hand. "That's your death warrant, or your confession," I said. Outside, I heard engines starting. The SUVs pulled away fast, disappearing into the night. Whoever they were, they weren't done. I looked at Rachel. She was pale, trembling, clutching her wand. "We have to go," she whispered. "Now? They'll be back. Then we take the fight to them," I said. She looked at me, eyes wide. "You don't even know who you're fighting." I smiled coldly. "That's the fun part." As we left the motel, the first light of dawn cut through the clouds, blood-red and heavy. Rachel limped beside me, clutching her side. I didn't help her. I couldn't. Whatever bond we'd had was gone. All that remained was purpose. The USB drive burned in my pocket like a live coal. That little piece of metal, the truth she'd kept from me, was now the only thing standing between justice and annihilation, and I was ready to use it. I thought about not going through with it. For a breathless second in the motel room, with the rain still tapping like a jury outside the window, I nearly let the whole thing burn out like a bad dream. Let the bureau sort the mess. Let Caleb's corpse and his secrets rot in someone else's hands. Let Rachel run or hide or die on her own terms. But that would have been surrender. And surrender is something I'd never forgiven her for, because she'd taught me how to give up on myself long before any of this began. So I drove. The drive north was empty and long. Fluorescent highway lines cutting through fog that clung to my windshield like guilt. The USB weight in my jacket felt like a heart. I kept thinking of how small it was, a tiny wedge of metal that could ruin parties, topple companies, send men to prison. How many times had I held less and swallowed more? How many times had I chosen silence because the noise would have taken everything? It's funny. The mind picks out details you'd thought forgotten. At a red light I watched my reflection in the glass. Puffy eyes, 5 o'clock shadow, face mapped in the lines of exhaustion and rage. I barely recognized the man staring back. A life rewired into something else. I pulled into a parking garage under an old textile mill and killed the engine. Briggs's number was a burner now. I'd given him the address earlier and told him to be 3 minutes after me. He was late, not something he could afford as a cop. When he finally slipped into the passenger seat, his breath smelled of coffee and bad decisions. "You sure about this?" he asked. The question wasn't about the plan. It was softer, like he was asking if I could still be a human being after we were done. "I'm sure," I lied. We walked into the mill together. The place smelled like machine oil and old promises. The lights were low, the hallway lined with offices whose names had been stripped. The stage they'd chosen for their deals, a neutral house where men in suits met and traded favors, still had the polish of money. Only the occupants were different. The USB had a map, not of streets, but of relationships, names, shell companies, timestamps, IP hops. The trail started at Caleb's condo, curled through shell accounts, and landed in the lap of a private contracting firm called Hawthorne Solutions, a name I'd never heard before that day but would come to hate. Hawthorne rented dead space in defense procurement. They moved things the government didn't want moved. They had people in the right places in procurement, compliance, and fraud oversight. And at the top of Hawthorne sat a man who never took calls. William Harrow, ex-senior official, ex-consultant to anyone who mattered, and the kind of person who always wore rain even in summer. Briggs tapped his cigarette into an ashtray with the delicate fury of a man who had tried to be clean his whole career and failed. "Harrow," he said, "that makes sense. He's the kind who thinks the law is a suggestion. We didn't go in blind. I'd planted a dozen breadcrumbs over the last week, fake transfers, ghost logins, ploys to shift attention. The USB was bait and ledger both. I had duplicated it and tweaked the copy to include one tempting, poisonous field, a route of funds that, if followed, would point directly to Harrow's private account in the Caymans. It was ugly theater. It was going to get blood on the stage. But I had rehearsed this scene in my head 1,000 times. We found Harrow in a back room of his company's temporary office, the sort of place where executives sign things and smiled and never touched the mechanics of what they ordained. He was exactly how YouTube exposes later described men like him. Silver hair combed to the side, eyes like polished marbles, voice smooth enough to grease a knife. He looked up and ruffled, as if he'd expected visitors. "Detective Briggs." He gave me a small, inoffensive nod like we were part of a charity gala. "And, Mr. Cole, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I set the USB on the table between us. "Proof that you used my wife and my name to hide millions in government contracts." Harrow's lashes flickered for half a second, like a bird considering a fly. "You must have some misunderstanding. These are complicated financial arrangements. You should put your sword down, Mr. Cole. Complicated isn't a dirty word for embezzlement." Briggs snapped. "Cut the act." Harrow's blink hardened. "You accusing me? You have no idea what's at stake. People like me keep the country functional. You can fling words and files, Mr. Cole, but be careful. You throw a rock in the pond, and the ripples you make won't stop until they hit your own doorstep." That was the held breath moment, the one they always film in thrillers. Reality doesn't quite hit like it does on TV. Instead it lands like the slow, deep reel of a bulldozer. I watched Harrow for movement, for the flick of a finger. He reached calmly for his glass. Briggs's hand hovered on his gun. The room was a chessboard, and no one wanted it to be over. I spoke. "I'll give you a choice. Walk away and let the file leak, or deny it and watch me hand this to the Bureau and a dozen journalists. You'll lose everything you've built on men like us." There it was, the top thinness of it. Harrow's jaw worked. He was a man who'd built a life on plausible deniability. He didn't have culpability in his vocabulary, but he had fear. Men like Harrow feel fear like a draft. He didn't show it. He calibrated it. He smiled the way sharks smile. "You don't know what you're touching, Ethan. There are elements in the deep state that don't like being exposed." And there it was, the card I'd expected. The cloak of patriotism, the legal velvet. "You go public," he said. "You blow up people who put food on half the country's table." I killed the smile that wanted to rise. "So, it's not just about me." "Fine. That makes the target bigger." Harrow reached out, impossibly quick. For a second I thought he'd grab the USB, and he did, but Briggs was faster. In one motion Briggs slammed his palm down, knocked Harrow's hand aside, and dove. The room erupted into motion. Guards came from the hallway, low voices shifted into gunmetal. I don't remember a lot of it clearly. The flash, the sound of a fist hitting flesh, the skate of a gun clasping the carpet. You learn a new calculus when you fight, and it's not pretty math. I had one aim: make them see me. Make them understand that the game had a player who could pull the board out from under them. When Harrow's suit hit the floor and the USB skidded away under a chair, something old in me, the salesman, the man who knew how to negotiate without blood, died. In his place was someone with a ledger and a kind of devotion to ruin. We didn't take Harrow back to a precinct. Briggs had contacts. He took care to call the right people, real ones, not the ones who signed secret memos. Harrow was picked up without a scene. He'd wake in a sterile room with analysts asking him about wire transfers. They'd taste his money. For a man like Harrow, it was the same as drowning. The fallout was beautiful and slow. News cycles are greedy things. They latch when there's a scent of scandal. I fed the files to one reporter with a backbone, the kind who believed in a headline that could change the world. The story leaked, and it spread like a forest fire through brittle brush. Hawthorne Solutions, the shell companies, the transfers in my name. Overnight, the world rearranged itself. But revenge isn't neat. The Bureau came knocking soon after. They had subpoenas and called avoidance in their collars. I'd set the stage to implicate Hera and expose Hawthorne, but the power lines of corruption are thicker than a single firm. When the Bureau woke the sleeping dogs in their own ranks, hands that had taken bribes and favors moved to preserve themselves. Men blinked awake and looked for scapegoats. A dozen lesser men took fame, or shame, or both, and Rachel. She called me from an unknown number the day the first article dropped. Her voice was thin with a kind of pleading I'd never heard from her. "Ethan, they said you did this. They said you set me up. I set a trap," I told her. "You walked into it. Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this to me?" There was a newness to my answer. It wasn't gloating. It was exhausted. "Because you made me old by taking my future. Because you made me a name on a ledger and convinced yourself it was love. I wanted you to feel the same erosion I felt." She made a sound like the fracture of a china cup. I didn't mean, but she'd meant it. The records, the transfers, the signatures, she'd signed them. In the weeks that followed, people I'd never met in my life received subpoenas. Boards collapsed. Men apologized on camera and used words like oversight and regret. Harrow's empire shriveled. His advisors turned on him like ants abandoning a drowned queen. Caleb's death jogged through the headlines as a shocking side note rather than the central sin. And only a few journalists asked the brutal question, who else had they used? The Bureau moved fast on the small fish and future convenience of those who could be sacrificed. They offered me immunity meetings across oak tables lit with fluorescent pity. They pressed me to cooperate, to testify, to be the reputable victim. For the first time since this began, there was a legal route to cleanness. I could walk in and put down my ledger, reveal everything, and walk out with the civil protections the law gives the wounded, but the deeper net, the men who kept contracts and favors in the shadows, didn't vanish. They receded and recalculated. They found others to run numbers, different marks to use. Corruption is adaptive. It can't die because it has no organism, only incentives. I stood on the courthouse steps on a rainy Tuesday, reporters like gulls circling, and watched Rachel let out in handcuffs. She'd been arrested that morning for fraud and conspiracy. The look on her face when cameras flashed was not the defiant mask I remembered. It was the face of someone who had been counted as a variable and finally realized she was not immortal. When she saw me, our eyes met. There was no apology in that look and no plea, just an acknowledgement, cool and precise. We'd both been players in a rigged game. Maybe she'd thought she'd be the one to win. Maybe she had. The law had other plans. I expected emptiness. I expected a triumphal hollow glee to fill me. Instead, what I felt was a slow, corrosive quiet. Watching her walk away in custody was not victory. It was punctuation, an end to an awful sentence. There's one more thing I did. The USB, I didn't hand it to the Bureau first. I made a copy, left one in a locker with a set of instructions, and mailed another to a journalist known for doing things right. The rest I encrypted and deleted from every machine I owned. Revenge was a dish best served with proof. Catharsis took a back seat to survival. Briggs testified. I testified. Harrow lost his country club privileges and a perch from which he'd passed favors for decades. Hawthorne Solutions was publicly disbanded. The government made speeches and promised reforms that tasted like promises always do. 3 months later, Rachel's trial began in a packed courtroom where we all sat like spectators at our own undoing. The jury listened to the ledger and the transferred funds and the intercepted calls. They watched private videos of handoffs, of signatures. They watched the legal unraveling of a life built on someone else's name. She was convicted. I went home and watched the live feed until the credits of the newscast blurred. People called me a hero in the quiet, and I let it sit like a stranger's jacket on a peg. My chest felt hollow, but there was a machinery of justice in motion. That should have been solace. Instead, it was the sound of locks turning, The last thing I did before the judge read the sentence was stand and look at Rachel. She looked back. The woman I'd loved, the woman who'd taken me apart and used my bones to scaffold her schemes, looked small. She was not a monster legendary in her cruelty. She was a frightened person who had bartered her humanity for safety. The judge read the sentence. 10 years? Asset seizure, restitution. You learn, at some point, that the law's measure and your own moral calculus are rarely the same. When the courthouse emptied, and the press vans left and the rain washed office windows clean, I drove to the lake where I'd sat that first night, the one with the fog and the moon that fooled me into thinking I could still find shore. I got out of the car and walked to the water's edge. I didn't want applause. I didn't want pity. I wanted the last of the anger to break like waves so I could see the bottom. I wanted proof that beneath all the ash there was soil dot at the edge. I opened the small envelope I'd kept since that first discovery, and with hands that trembled like a man who still had something to lose, I scattered the contents into the water. Copies of the most damning documents, the names, the numbers. I watched them float a second, swollen and slick, and then sink. Paper sinks fast in that kind of cold. Part of me wanted the evidence to be gone, for the world to forget and move on. Another part wanted the world to remember exactly what had been done. There's a smell at the water's edge after rain, sharp and honest. I breathed it in. It tasted like endings and beginnings braided together. Briggs crouched beside me and didn't speak for a long time. He'd kept his distance during the trial. There are laws and ethics about cops and vendettas, but in the end he sat with me like a man who'd watched a friend burn. You did what you had to, he said finally. It sounded like more than permission. Did I asked. He shrugged. You set a trap. You lit a fuse. You made choices. The rest is the machine we live in. There are men who will tell you revenge is empty. They'll say the void is all that's left when you take someone down. Maybe they're right. Maybe it is empty. But sitting there watching the lake swallow ink and seeing the first slice of daylight push through clouds, I felt something else, the slight, improbable peace of a man who'd reclaimed his name. Rachel would wake up in the sterile color of a prison morning and maybe, finally, understand the arithmetic of what she'd taken. Harrow would make denials until his hair fell out. Hawthorne would be a cautionary tale on business school syllabi. The Bureau would tighten its nets and adjust its gears. Men keep doing what they do. That hasn't changed. As for me, people change under certain pressures. I'd chosen a path that made me dangerous to others and maybe, eventually, to myself. I'd traded a life for a ledger. I'd learned things a man never wants to know about greed and the ease with which a name can be borrowed and laundered. The last thing I saw before I left the lake was my reflection. Clearer than before, lines, shadows, a man who had loved, been loved, used, and then forced to choose what kind of monster he would become to balance the scales. I dropped the last paper into the water and watched it go down. In this story there were no perfect endings. There were only decisions and consequences. I walked back to the car and drove away. Some people say I should have let the law do its work and not taken matters into my own hands. Others say I saved the system from worse rot. Maybe both are true, but in the quiet miles afterward, with the USB burned in a crucible of flames and the world rearranged by the noise we made, I felt something I hadn't in months. Exhaustion, sure, but a thin, durable thread of something else. Ownership. I'd been an asset on a ledger. I'd been a tool. I'd been a ghost living in someone else's story. Now I had my name back. That was, for me, enough.